watching Plain Speak here on CNN News 18. I am Ridhima Bhatnagar. Is rape not a rape if the man behind the act is your own husband? That has been the debate for years now. While women's rights activists question that is a woman's testimony not enough, why is consent not seen as the fulcrum of any event? Critics feel that marital law could impact the fundamental institution of a marriage. The Delhi High Court today gave a split decision on the constitutionality of the marital law exception. Justice Ravi Shekdar held the exception 2 to Section 375, which prescribes the marital rape exception is violative of Article 14, 15, 21 of the Constitution and hence must be struck down. However, Justice Hari Shankar, the other judge on the division bench, disagreed and held that there were no grounds for the court to strike the exception down, which was justified under Article 14 because there was an intelligible differentia created by marriage. Now, this exception has been part of the IPC since its inception in 1860, having been justified in the original draft of the criminal law in 1839 as an exception necessary to protect the conjugal rights of a husband. Now, as per the latest NHFS data, 1 in every 3 women in India between the ages of 15 and 49, they stated that they'd experienced some form of violence from their spouses. Nearly 80% of women reported their husbands as perpetrators and 9% reported their former husbands as perpetrators. If you go back to 2000, the Law Commission of India, while considering several proposals to reform India's laws on sexual violence, they had rejected any need to remove the marital law exception, saying, and I'd like to quote, "We are not satisfied that this exception should be recommended to be deleted since that may sound to excessive interference with the marital relationship." So what really has played out in the High Court today? Is there a need to criminalize as far as marital law is concerned, or is there a fear that this could be misused? I'll take that question to our guests in just a bit. But first, let's break down the details of what we heard from the High Court. Why was it a split judgment? It was a 2-judge bench. You had Justice Shekdar striking down the exception granted by the law, calling them unconstitutional. But on the other hand, you had Justice Shankar upholding the exception granted by the law. As I said, this was a 2-judge bench. It is now a split verdict, which means there is status quo. Justice Shekdar also went on to say that this exception, which is exception 2, that protects men who forced non-consensual intercourse with wives, is in fact illegal. On the other hand, you had Justice Shankar saying the exception doesn't violate Article 14, 19 or even Article 21. Justice Shekdar also went on to say the exception violates the right to equality, the freedom of speech and expression. So when a woman says no, it should be taken at face value. Justice Shankar went on to say the exception based on marriage as intelligible criteria. Now, what will happen from here on? Because this was a 2-judge bench, if it is a split verdict, the matter will now be referred to the Supreme Court. The big question also here to note is India the only country where this is actually not seen as a criminal offence, or are there many countries where this is actually followed? Countries where marital rape is a crime or punishable under law. If you look at the majority of the first world countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Norway, they've all criminalized as far as marital rape is concerned. If you talk about the third world countries like Ghana, Gambia, Chile and many others, they've also criminalized as far as marital law is concerned. If you talk about Russia, they've removed marital exemption from its rape laws in 1922. If you talk about Poland, that recognized marital rape as a criminal offence in 1932. So as we said, the big question as far as India is concerned, is criminalizing of marital rape the need of the hour, or could it actually become a tool by women which could be misused in the future as well? Let me now take all these questions to our guests who are joining us on this very special broadcast. We have Sai Deepak J, advocate of the Supreme Court; Deepika Narayanan, she is a men's rights activist; Trisha Shetty, founder of She Says; Amita Pitre, Gender Justice, Oxfam India; and Ms. Karuna Nandi, also a lawyer and a petitioner as far as this case is concerned. Good evening to all of you. Good to have all of you on the broadcast with us here on CNN News 18. Ms. Karuna Nandi, since you were a petitioner, let me begin with you first. How do you respond to the split verdict that we saw by the High Court today?
It's been a long fight, Riddhima. We have argued this in 2 rounds already before 2 separate benches. We are grateful for the patient hearing by both judges and the day-to-day hearing, which I think was very important in this case. The fight will go on. The reason that we don't lose energy is because every day women are being raped in the worst ways, and some of them in the context of marriage, right? And for the women who are married and the rapists are their husbands, they don't get the protection of the law that because the law has progressed quite a lot. And I think that it's quite clear that when these women got married, they didn't feel that the conjugal right included the right to be forced into sexual intercourse, the right to be forced into anal sex, the right for your husband to be exempt from participation in gang rape when that happened, if that happens, right? And there was a case of it recently that came up during the hearing and that we put before the court. And it is on behalf of these women, because the petitioners that I represent are the All India Democratic Women's Association and the Ritz Foundation. And IDWA, for example, represents, has as its registered members about 10 million women. And they're dealing with this issue every day. So it's a burning issue, and it needs to be, this blot needs to be removed from our constitution, and it needs to be removed from our country. And I think that more and more Indians are in support of this, and that is also something that brings up energy.
Okay, fair points that Ms. Nandi is making, but Trisha, I want to bring you in here. While all the points that Ms. Nandi makes are valid, the big concern, and this is where I want to kickstart the debate, is how do you believe what the woman says on face value? And this is not what I'm saying. This is where the criticism stands by the other side as far as the legal team is concerned. When a marital rape happens, the woman says there was no consent. The husband says, I thought there was consent. It's happened in the four walls of their bedroom or their house with no witnesses. How does one then define whether it was marital rape or not?
I think that's a very valid point, okay? So let's look at the data and facts. In India, over 90% of cases of sexual violence are perpetrated by someone closely known to the survivor or the victim. So it is not usually a stranger in a dark alley, the kind of boogeyman that we like to talk about. Now, in all of these cases, often, you can't just say, hey, you can't just go to a police station and say, hey, I got raped, and the person gets arrested willy-nilly. I have followed these cases of rape survivors, and I will tell you, there is due process. There is a question of expert testimony, the testimony of doctors. If you've been in a marriage and you've been suffering prolonged sexual abuse, the testimony of your psychiatrist, of your physician who has seen you, the testimony of close friends and family members whom you have confided in. So you can't just say these things and then, it's like, how is one supposed to believe? Will you put a camera in my bedroom to check? Also, I think it's important to talk about, more often than not, these cases go unreported, especially when the perpetrator is someone closely known to the survivor, especially a man. There is a great concept of societal shame, of generational shame as well, where women are asked and told, if you don't have sex with your husband, who else will you have sex with, right? So it's not something that, you see women, anyways, there is shame and trauma when it comes to, unfortunately, that is put on a survivor when it comes to rape. On top of that, when you know the person and have a close relation, there is further shame and trauma. So this idea that women will go around filing false rape cases, and that, we need to have a law that basically says, what does the law say right now? And this is something I heard Karunanidhi speak about very eloquently. The law basically says right now that if your boyfriend rapes you, you have recourse. If you've been separated from your husband, which is also what Justice Harishankar said, that, there is recourse for a woman who's separated from her husband. Then there is recourse if your husband
if you're married to that man. Let me take that question to Sai Deepak, and that's a valid question that Trisha and Ms. Nandi are raising. That either way, many of these cases go unreported because there is a sense of shame. The few cases that actually get reported, if there is no law on their side, where will these women go?
So I think there is perhaps a larger issue which needs to be addressed, and maybe the kind of gulf that is sought to be painted between the position of the people I represented and the petitioner's position is not as much. The point is, I don't think anybody is going to question the need for criminalization of sexual violence within a marriage. It must be recognized under any circumstance. So let me make it abundantly clear. I said that in court. I've said this in my written submissions over and over again. The question is whether Section 376B, which requires some form of separation, either de facto or de jure or legal separation, to prove sexual violence without consent, is that alone sufficient to address the concerns of the petitioner? Let us assume for a moment, for the sake of the argument, that I completely agree with everything that the petitioners have said. The point then still remains, this is something for the legislature to look into, simply because the removal of an exception under Section 375 creates a certain offense or takes away an exception, which has the effect of enlarging the scope of people who are attracted by Section 375. This is something which is very different from, let's say, the situation where Section 66A was struck down by the Supreme Court, or Section 377 was read down by the Supreme Court. Okay? Those are instances where criminalization was reduced as a consequence of the provision being either struck down or read down. Here, criminalization would be increased, which is effectively in the realm of the legislature. Second, the point that's been made is the creation of an offense typically needs at least a definition and then evidentiary standards, and an ecosystem itself is created when an offense is recognized.
Okay.
This is something that a court cannot do. If you read the opening submissions, in fact, the better part of the submissions, it revolves around this issue. 3, all over the world, in all the jurisdictions that you cited in your opening comments, sexual harassment laws have become gender neutral. So therefore we said...
So if I understand from what Sai is saying, that the problem is not here with it going to the courts, the responsibility also lies with the legislature. Okay, I'll come to that part in just a bit, but I want to bring in Deepika also. Deepika, I know the criticism that coming in is that if you do go forward and you criminalize marital law, then there is a fear that women could misuse it. But that's a hypothetical situation that you're working with. Working with this hypothetical situation and not going ahead with this law, are you not meting out injustice to the women who continue to suffer every single day?
Ridhima, I am actually appalled that you would call the concern of misuse as hypothetical. One, because our courts have commented upon, let's keep 498 aside, have commented repeatedly now post the Nirbhaya amendments of misuse of rape laws. It's Rajasthan Police's official affidavit to the Rajasthan High Court that 43% of rape cases that they investigated in 2017, 18, 19 were false. In 2019, 51% of the rape cases reported in India, where I think Trisha talked about, you can accuse your boyfriend of rape, were rape on false promise of marriage, whether there was ever any promise made or not. After the 2014 Arnesh Kumar judgment, which gave recourse to the husbands from immediate arrest by the police, we have increasingly seen 377 and 376 roped in matrimonial disputes, where the old father-in-law, brother-in-law would be roped in rape cases, and the husband would be roped in 377. You wouldn't see this phenomena before 2014, so it bars any imagination. Why would these criminal provisions would be brought in after 2014? Simple fact, they want to get the husband arrested. A lot of these cases would eventually turn into compromise, and that is the overall end result, which is going to happen because of misuse. Misuse of matrimonial laws and matrimonial disputes, Ridhima, is not hypothetical. Supreme Court called misuse of 498A as legal terrorism. It has repeatedly said that lawyers design these complaints to implicate the husband and their family. Right now, there are so many cases in which the brothers of the husbands are languishing in jails because of marital dispute. So it leaves to no one's imagination on how, if marital rape law comes in the form that it is, it will definitely going to be misused. And one more very important point with which Trisha and I think Aruna both missed out. Section 113A of the Evidence Act, which came after the Nirbhaya amendments, puts the onus of proof on the person if the sexual intercourse is proven.
Okay.
And this case scenario, in marital rape case, it would be, the burden of proof would be on the husband to prove.
Okay.
And let me tell you, Ridhima, right now, post Nirbhaya amendments, 164 statement of the woman is the only evidence that the police is taking. There is no psychiatrical evaluation when the rape case is reported after 3-4 years. Medical evidence has no repercussion or no consequence. So it's only the statement
I can
of the
see
woman.
Trisha nodding. I'll go to Trisha in just a bit, but I want to first go across to Amita.
Yeah,
Amita,
just within 30 seconds, just within 30 seconds, Ridhima. Just within 30 seconds, I am right now dealing with cases where one woman has filed 8 rape cases within 1 year. One woman has filed 4 rape cases within 1 year. Only on the basis of testimony, these men have been put behind bars. And that's going to happen in marital rape cases also.
Are we painting all women with the same brush? That's my concern. But Amita, I want to understand from you, because this back and forth still continues. I want to understand from you, where do you think the complexity really lies that it's getting so difficult to come to a verdict?
Okay, so let me begin with just underlying that the principle of equality and non-discrimination matters. Because otherwise, by not reading down the exception of marital rape, we are actually creating a subclass, a secondary class of citizens for which there is no equality in front of law, and non-discrimination doesn't work. And basically, as we see, women's subordination is at the root cause of all the gender inequality that we see as of today. So the principle of the matter is really important. That's one. The second thing is the devil lies in the details. Because we see that especially gender protective laws are very much subject to this bogey of false complaints. I'll give 2 examples. There's one of 498A, which is for cruelty in marriage. It was a very important provision in the 1980s where none of the other laws to protect women, for example, the domestic violence law, which came in 2005, did not exist. Tata Institute of Social Sciences did a study on why is there so much talk about 498A being misused, and they found that the problem lied in, one is very poor investigation, because of which these cases were just languishing in the courts, and finally the women had nowhere else to go, and they actually decided to compromise with their dignity, go back to their marital home, because sometimes even the natal home is not ready to accept you, and then withdrew the case. And all those cases, nearly 80% of those cases were filed as false cases.
I think that's a fair point that Amita is making, that we keep talking about that if this law does go through, this will be against the institution of marriage, or what fundamentally the institution of marriage should represent. But here in this argument, are we forgetting the dignity of women? I'll take that question to Trisha and to Sai in just a bit, but I want to go back to Ms. Nandi. Ms. Nandi, we've heard from all the panelists, and this is exactly where the concern lies. One, that if this does go through, can this be misused? And secondly, more importantly, that there are already platforms as far as grievance platforms for women are concerned. Why do we need this law to be changed then?
One is that there are other legal provisions that are used at the moment because the rape provision is not available, right? But if you look at Section 354, for instance, Section 354 is just simple sexual assault. Now, this could be something if somebody touches your shoulder and, in a very sexual way, or just brushes their hand across somebody's breast in a non-consensual manner. 354 could be invoked, right? Now, look at the difference between that and rape. 498A and Section 326 are for grievous hurt, for quite serious hurt. Now, the large percentage of forced sexual intercourse comes between the two, and therefore then actually falls between these posts, and then therefore there is no criminal law that adequately addresses what happened. There's also the principle of fair labeling, that if you address what happened, then the evidence law follows, the criminal procedure code follows, and it's all within a particular structure. If you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, the likelihood of justice just reduces dramatically. But also, very importantly, I think it's important, we must keep in our minds that if a woman is raped, then she has the right to free medical care in a hospital,
Yeah.
including a private hospital. She has the right to be forensically examined and for that evidence to be preserved in a particular manner. And
Okay.
in fact, the police, etc., will encourage her to do so when the complaint goes. There is the right to compensation from the state
Okay.
to support in because once you've been assaulted, suddenly you have to do all these things, and there are there's an additional burden to the prosecutrix.
Correct.
And this is not available if the woman is married to the person who raped her. Should it not be?
Okay, let me take that question to Sai. And Sai, I also want to quote what senior advocate Rajshekhar Rao, who's also an amicus curiae in the case, had argued that every day this provision remains on statutory books. Women are actually denied the ability to call a rape a rape. So then my question is, are we really missing the basics of letting a woman decide when she feels violated or not?
First of all, I don't think anybody has cited the sanctity of the institution of marriage to say that a woman's dignity must be sacrificed at the altar of marriage. So let's not resort to these cliched arguments. These submissions were not made. Let's stick to what was submitted. 2, nobody has made the statement in court that marriage justifies all kinds of sexual violence on women. The only thing that was submitted in court is simply this. Evidentiary standards will have to be different. And therefore, this is something for the legislature to come out with, because you will not be, as a court, be able to come out with evidentiary standards that are supposed to be observed when rape is recognized in the context of marriage. And you started your opening statement by making the observation that all of the countries, the so-called first world countries, first of all, that term first world shouldn't be used in India. But when you use this particular phrase and you say that all these countries have removed, let's say, the marital exception to rape, please educate yourself once more. We have led specific documents to the effect of showing that what happens in the United States and what happens in UK, what happens in Australia, specifically showing that spousal sexual violence is recognized as a separate category in itself, which is to say there is rape and then there is spousal sexual violence, which again has different prosecution guidelines, which has different consensual guidelines, which has different evidentiary guidelines. So please don't make the statement and mislead the viewers by making the statement that across the world this has happened and India happens to be part of this third world group, which is unwilling to recognize marital exception, or let's say the concept of marital rape. That is not the situation. Every document from Nepal to United Kingdom to United States to Australia has been filed to show what is the diversity of opinion within the United States.
Okay.
What is the position in UK? So let's not mislead people into believing that India somehow has painted itself in a corner, which is not the case.
Okay. I sometimes think when we make these arguments, Sai, we take the human aspect alone and we like to stick to the legal arguments, which is fair. But are you completely taking out the human aspect of this entire argument? Trisha, what I want to understand from you also
You've asked a question, let me respond to that.
I will come back to you, Sai. I'll come back to you. Trisha,
you can't throw a question as an allegation. You'll have to let me respond.
No, I'll let you respond. But Trisha, I want to understand from you, this is exactly what Sai and others were also saying. Are we possibly putting too much responsibility on the courts? Should this have been a decision that should have already been taken by the legislature or the parliament?
So let's talk about that, right? What has the center, the government, said so far? In 2017, they filed an affidavit opposing the criminalization of marital rape, and I quote, because it would destabilize the institution of marriage. The government, even in this case, has repeatedly asked to defer the matter, to ask for a comprehensive approach. They have said comprehensive approach, but yet they've clearly shown where their bias leans by making statements like this will open the floodgate of false cases, that criminalization of marital rape, rather by dropping the exception, would have far-reaching socio-legal implications. So in this case, we know where the government stands. We've had ministers in the past talk about how Indian women do not understand the concept of consent because it is a Western concept. So we know where clearly our government and the center stands when it comes to this. Now, we really need to talk about this false rape case boogie. A low conviction rate does not correlate to false cases. And the second thing, if we want to talk about facts, there is also the fact of this UNFPA study that says 1 out of 3 men in India have admitted to having forceful sexual relations with their wives. So in effect, what is the institution of marriage? You're basically telling a woman who's being raped within the institution of marriage that she does not have autonomy over her body, that she does not have the legal right to withdraw her consent or give consent, that violence committed against her by her husband in terms of rape will not be recognized as such. Now, you tell me, what sort of civilized society does that reflect? To me, that is not the kind of society that we should be raising any women into, or telling them that this is why you should have faith in the institution of marriage. And again, when it comes to the human aspect, I will tell you, it leaves grave psychosocial trauma on women who don't even know how to call what is happening against them rape, because the law doesn't recognize it. So they are routinely told to adjust. They are routinely told to adjust to the crime that is happening on their bodies, because there is no definition legally that is recognized.
While, of course, yes, both sides is a fair argument that if women need protection by the law, what about the men? But what about the bodily rights of a woman herself? Deepika?
Ridhima, let me first tell you, am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Let me first of all respond to what Trisha is saying, that women do not have the rights to say no, or they don't even know what's happening with them. As per National Family Health Survey report, which has just come out, the articles were there in the newspapers all over. About 80 to 90% women have told the surveyors that they said a no when they wanted to say a no to the husband for sex. So let us not presume that women have absolutely no authority, or they cannot say no to a husband if they do not want to have sex with them. Second, when people say that there is a bogey of false cases, I think they're contradicting themselves. And also the court judgments which have repeatedly said that there are these laws that are being misused. And going back to the effectiveness of 498A, like one of the panelists said, it came in 1980, there was no law. Right now, under 498A, because of so much of abuse of this law, the efficacy of the law has reduced. So anybody who says that misuse of laws or a false case is a bogey is absolutely unreal and absolutely doesn't know what's happening on ground. And last thing, Ridhima, there's one very important thing that you need to hear.
I have to give Amita also the final word. Amita, because this was a split verdict today, where do you see this headed? What do you see as the final outcome? Deepika, Amita, final word.
Like I mentioned, the principle of the matter is important. I also feel that other laws need to be strengthened equally. The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act needs to be strengthened. Whatever are the problems that are ailing the 498A law of cruelty within marriage needs to be worked out. And even women don't get even simple things like maintenance, even when it's agreed by the court. So I think a whole range of laws need to work well in favor of women. At the same time, for the principle of gender equality to be upheld, we also need this marital exception to go. And it is time, because the law of adultery has gone, the law of Section 377 has gone, because all of these together held up the institution of marriage as sacrosanct. That marriage is meant only for procreative sex, and male-female sex, which is procreative. 377 did away with that. That the woman
this is
a
where
man's
things
property
currently stand. The High Court saying it is a split verdict. It will possibly go to the Supreme Court. We'll have to see which way this goes. I've completely run out of time. I'd like to thank all our guests who took our time and joined us here on CNN News 18. We're now shifting our focus to the other big story that we're tracking this evening, which is coming in front of India's neighbors. The situation in Sri Lanka is calmer today than it was yesterday when violent protests hit the country. Curfew will also be lifted tomorrow if no incidents are reported today. The ex-Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa was seen boarding a chopper from Colombo to a naval base in a rescue operation conducted by the military. He'd been taken to the largest naval base of the Sri Lankan Navy. Sri Lanka's Ministry of Defence has ordered the Army, the Air Force and the Navy to open fire on anybody looting public property or causing harm to others. Also, in an interesting political development, Leader of Opposition Sajith Premadasa has expressed willingness to be the interim Prime Minister, but only if the President Gotabaya resigns.
What exactly did you see? You were here, right?
Yeah, I was around here, and like I saw some people came from there, like they were like try to assault people, and like when I saw someone was trying to hit my like tent with a stick. Too much people were here, like 50 to 80 or something, 100.
Are you scared to continue protesting here?
No, we are not like scared
Okay,
anything.
nothing is going to
Nothing is
stop
going
you
to
from
happen. Like,
protesting.
they can't do anything to us. Like, we are not scared to go away without. If God has go home. Like, we want him to go. Like, he's destroying this country. So, what we need now is like something.
A change
Someone
in system?
can like.
You need a change in system?
We have to change this system.
This is now a CNN News 18 exclusive. My colleague Purnima Murli, who has been reporting for us from Colombo, is in conversation with the leader of opposition, Sajid Premadasa. Let's listen in. We'll just play out that conversation of the leader of opposition, Sajid Premadasa, to my colleague Purnima Murli in just a bit. But we continue to track the developments coming in from Sri Lanka. There were violent protests. Things are much calmer today. A lot of anger against the Rajapakshas. That continues. Let's listen into this conversation.
Sri Lanka ever since Monday. We've seen the aftermath also. What are the reasons that led to the violence and, clashes that broke out since Monday and it followed for the next 24 hours?
Continuously for about 30 days, the protests were all peaceful. Then the ex-Prime Minister had a so-called farewell meeting with his supporters, and apparently in the aftermath of the meeting, his supporters, thugs, political goons, got together and smashed up the demonstrators. Their belongings were taken. The place where they were demonstrating was destroyed. They did so in front of the Prime Minister's official residence, and they marched on to Golf Face, which is where the protesters were protesting against the present president, and they got hammered by Mahinda Rajapaksa's political goons and thugs. So a 30-day peaceful protest, which is the right of the citizens of our country, that right was blatantly, fundamentally violated. And the blame goes squarely on both the Prime Minister and the President for not being able to protect those demonstrators. In the aftermath of those attacks, there has been a violent reaction. I will in no way approve nor condone those violent acts. What happened in the morning was violent and was reprehensible. What happened in the aftermath of the Rajapaksa goons attacking is also reprehensible. It must not be tolerated. So it's a very sad state of affairs in our country right at this juncture.
Was this planned? Because protests were peaceful for over a month. Do you think it was a planned event by the Rajapakshas?
Everything that we see, the speeches that were made inside temple trees, the Prime Minister's official residence, everything points to an attack that was promoted, instigated, well organized, well nourished, and very well financed.
So what could be done to stop violence, to stop the circle of violence? Because, over the last 48 hours, there's been extremely uneasy calm across Sri Lanka, and they've also issued shooting orders. what is the way forward to ensure that violence comes to an end in the island nation?
Well, as I told you before, violence, attacks, murder, mayhem is not something that one should tolerate. We have to go by the rule of law. We have to ensure that law and order is protected and implemented. So I would take this opportunity to call upon my fellow Sri Lankans.
So the situation still remains tense as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, but it is a lot calmer than what we've seen in the last 2 days, the violent protests that had broken out. A lot of anger that continues to mount against the Rajapakshas. After a lot of back and forth, we've seen Mahinda Rajapaksa, now the ex-Prime Minister, who put in his resignation and decided to step down. But the anger of the people doesn't end there. They also want the president to step down because they feel that it was the Rajapakshas in this one family which has led Sri Lanka to face one of its worst economic crises. But all the signs that we've seen from the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa do not indicate that he would be stepping down. In fact, initially when this crisis had broken out, the president gone on to say that I'm not going anywhere. I will take this crisis head on. Let's understand what the ground situation looks like and if that curfew in fact will be lifted or not. My colleague Purnima, who continues to report for us from Colombo, is now joining us on the broadcast. Purnima, talk to us about what you've seen right through the day. What is the situation like? And are there enough signs to indicate that that curfew will be lifted tomorrow?
Well, the Defence Ministry had earlier announced today that if the situation remains calm for the next 12 hours, then the curfew, which ends tomorrow, will be lifted. Remember, the curfew was supposed to be lifted today, but considering that violence broke out and it continued all through yesterday, they in fact extended the curfew till 7 a.m. tomorrow. And today, situation has been calm. Things have been much better than what it was yesterday. Protests have been peacefully conducted at the golf face today. Therefore, the Defence Ministry said that if the situation continues, then they will in fact lift the curfew tomorrow. So over the last 24 hours, things have been better. Protests have been peaceful, and the local media here has been reporting that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and his family members are not in the island nation, and the protesters once again demanding the resignation of President, and the leader of opposition also says that that's the only way forward for Sri Lanka to get back to normalcy.
Purnima, I also want to understand there is of course a lot of growing anger that still continues against the Rajapakshas themselves because the local people feel it's this one family which has led Sri Lanka to face this crisis. Multiple reports, we've also accessed a few visuals of family members of the Rajapakshas trying to flee Sri Lanka. Some have been moved to the naval base. We still don't know where Mahinda Rajapaksa is. We saw a lot of protesters trying to block the exit points also. Do we have any clarity on where the ex-Prime Minister is? Is he still in Sri Lanka?
Well, he's in the naval base. That's the latest information. While there were reports that he may be leaving for India, the Indian High Commission made it very clear, denying that these are wrong information. These are not factually correct, and that Mahinda Rajapaksa has not left for India. That was the confirmation that came in from the Indian High Commission. And according to sources, he is at the naval base as we speak. We've seen visuals of the helicopter leaving Temple Trees, the official residence of Prime Minister, and that's left for the naval base. And we've also seen earlier in the week how Namal Rajapaksa, the son of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, his family members also left the island nation. So it's only President who's reportedly still here monitoring the situation, while Mahinda Rajapaksa and other family members have reportedly fled the island nation and are currently at the naval base as we speak.
Purnima, we'll leave the conversation there. Thanks a lot for getting us all those details. Let me also introduce a guest joining us to discuss where is Sri Lanka headed. We have Fidel Fernando, journalist and author. Fidel, I want to begin with you. With the president not giving any signs of a man who is about to step down, you've got the ex-prime minister, some of his family members in hiding, being moved to naval bases. Anger on the street still continues. Where do you see all of this headed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question. I think for now we've heard, or the latest news coming out is that we've heard that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, will be making a special statement to the country at 9 p.m. today. So that's in about an hour and a half. And there's also been reports that he's currently meeting Ranil Wickremesinghe, the former prime minister. I don't think that any of this is going to appease the people. Ranil Wickremesinghe very much also a figure of that people have not have aimed their anger against. Over the last few weeks, we've seen that everybody of the old establishment, of the old political establishment, Gotabaya Rajapaksa included, but also Ranil Wickremesinghe, who has been sort of complicit in much of where Sri Lankans see their state having failed them, has also been a figure that they've aimed their anger against. If you go to the protest sites in Colombo, in other parts of the country, Ranil Wickremesinghe is not a beloved man. His own party has only one seat in parliament at the moment. So if Gotabaya Rajapaksa's big announcement tonight is that Ranil Wickremesinghe may be installed as prime minister, I don't see that being in any way palatable to the protesters or any way palatable to the Sri Lankan people. And we've seen through surveys, the Centre of Policy Alternatives a couple of weeks ago put out a survey.
Interesting that you say that, because that's the other aspect that I wanted to understand from you. We've spoken at length about a possible regime change, possible options as far as the opposition is concerned. But will that be enough to take Sri Lanka out of this crisis that we are continuing to see, one of the worst economic crises? Because for the common people on the ground, price hike, inflation, that's not going anywhere. So I actually want to understand, in middle of all of this back and forth that's happening with the Rajapaksas and the offers that we're seeing from the opposition, what's happening as far as this economic crisis is concerned? Where does the bailout currently stand? What is the plan to ensure that this inflation and price hike ends?
So the new central bank governor today held a press conference, and he said that Sri Lanka is essentially on the precipice. They're on the edge of not being able to pay for the next shipment of fuel, which could precipitate 10, 12-hour power cuts. And he was very much of the view that political stability has to return to the country in order for the economic kind of stability to return, for the IMF talks to be kind of the negotiations to the IMF to return to normalcy, and for them to deliver economic relief for the people of Sri Lanka. But there is also a separate but very interconnected political crisis, which the people have been very, very clear that they wanted Gotabaya Rajapaksa to go home. I am personally of the view that there can be no stability in Sri Lankan politics without credibility, and it's very clear that Gotabaya Rajapaksa has lost all credibility.
While there is mounting anger as far as the Rajapaksas is concerned, one also needs to understand that you need a timely intervention and you need a timely solution. Time is of the essence. Amizat Eagle, lawyer and activist, also now joining us on the broadcast. Today I saw a comment that came from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which said, matter of 2 days and you could see the economy completely collapse to a level where it'll be very difficult to rebring it or rebuild it or to bring it back to some sort of stability. Where do you think things have gone completely wrong? Why are we not understanding the time is of the essence? These conversations as far as the bailout still continue.
Yes, I think what has gone wrong is fairly clear in terms of in the short term and also in the long term. The economic crisis is a combination of things, I think also exacerbated by what's happening globally, but also very bad decision-making and mismanagement of the current government. The fact that it's not understood the time is of the essence is really the core of the problem right now. There is no focus on what the people really need and what needs to be done in terms of ensuring that the food crisis and the fuel crisis, all of these are addressed to ensure some sort of protection and some sort of life is maintained in some way. But the whole entire focus is on the political crisis at the moment, and that is very unfortunate indeed.
Very unfortunate indeed. I will have to wrap that discussion there. I'd like to thank our guests. This will be a story that we'll keep tracking very, very closely to see if there is an intervention as far as the IMF is concerned and if there is some solution also on the streets as far as the anger of the protesters are concerned. We are slipping into a very short break. Don't go anywhere. Coming back with lots more.